Hello everyone, my name is Ewok and welcome to DIY Gamer. Today I'm going to show you how to build a Scuf gaming controller for the Xbox One. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and tell you, the Xbox One controller is kind of confusing if you haven't messed with it before. If you're used to the 360 controller, but not the one on the inside and playing around with it, taking it apart and stuff, you're probably going to be in for some surprises. And this thing, I don't know what the hell the engineers at Microsoft are thinking, but it's kind of ridiculous on the inside. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started, and I will show you how to disassemble it. I'm going to do this in parts. I'm going to leave a directory on the screen, you should be seeing it right now, where you can skip around in the video depending on what part you want to watch. Before you start actually taking apart your controller, you need to do what I'm doing here. Find the sweet spot of your triggers, put a piece of tape over your triggers, like I'm doing here, and then slowly pull down on the trigger until it fires. Have Call of Duty or Titanfall or something running in the background, and figure out the exact spot your trigger fires at. Pull down slowly, and bam. Take your black pin or whatever, pull down slowly, and bam, and then mark. I have my grip plate removed. I'll show you how to do that in a minute, but make that mark, and this will come in handy later. Okay, to disassemble the controller, you're going to need some screwdrivers or something to pry it open with. I have a bag of these little toothpick things. I picked them up at the dollar store, and they work really well for this because they don't scuff up the controller or anything. But you stick them in the side like I'm doing there, and you can feel some clamps, and you just sit there and you unclamp those clamps with your screwdriver or your pick or whatever you're using. You'll probably need 2 or 3 different objects to stick in there. As you can see, I'm sticking my screwdriver in there now. But once you get one side done, you gotta kind of release a latch up top of the other side, and it should pull right off. When I did that, I snapped another snap back down here, so I had to unclick it. So I go back up here and I just pull it right off. So once you unhook that top one, it just pulls right off. I was trying to see if I could maybe yank it off on that one, but nope, it's not happening. You're gonna have to pry some, or you're gonna have to unhook the hooks with the toothpick or a screwdriver or something like that. So you just got to do the same thing on this side. Just unhook those hooks, stick them in there, and then once you have those hooks unlatched, you can just pull the faceplate thing right off, and the screw should be exposed. I should get mine here in just a second. Yeah, I'm being kind of forceful with it because I don't really care about marking it up at this point. But I'm working on a Titanfall controller, as you can see, which is really pretty. I don't really mess it up, but there we go. Get the plates off, put those to the side, flip it over. Take off the battery cover, I assume. This is me grabbing the wrong screwdriver. That was a Phillips head. This is a Torx T8. It's a security bit. It's the same screwdriver you use to take apart the 360 controller. If you don't have one, you'll have to get one. I'll put a link in the description. But you also need to peel back the sticker thing in the battery compartment. It's covering up a screw. You can always put it back on. It's not one of those security tape things. It's just a sticker. It just comes right off and on. So pull that off. I'm having troubles here, as you can see. My fingernails are not very long, so I was having issues pulling that sticker off. So I finally get it, and there is the screw, and that should be the first one that I undo. You might want to have a little jar next to you where you can put your screws in, because you do not want to lose these screws. They are very valuable. Also, one of the screws was stripped for me. I hadn't even messed with the controller yet, and one of the screws came factory stripped. If this happens to you, you might want to get a flathead screwdriver that's as long as the screw is, that's as long as the Torx T8 is, and wedge it in there and kind of really put some pressure on it and twist, and you might be able to unscrew it. That's what I did, and it worked. So I want to give you a heads up on that. But anyways, just unscrew the screws, and you should be good to go. I'll come back in just a minute, and we'll go on to the next step. Alright, so here things get a little bit tricky. First of all, after you remove the screws, just pop off the faceplate. It comes off, you just throw it to the side, don't lose it. And you gotta use some force here, kinda, to pull the back part of the controller off. But now you have the first board inside the controller. Now, you gotta take off the rumble packs first. You can put them back on if you want to. I chose not to, but You can usually just pull them off. I was kind of worried about ripping the traces out, so I was really careful about pulling them out. On the other side, I think I actually used my soldering iron, but that's why I'm not just pulling them out, because I was scared I might rip out the trace. So I'm being gentle with it. But as you'll see in a second, you can just use your soldering iron and touch it for like a second, and that wire will pop right out. But you can, like I said, if you don't want, or if you want to keep your rumble motors, you still have to remove them for the disassembly, but you can always solder them back. It's just that simple. I mean, you can deattach them and reattach them as much as you want. It's not going to hurt anything. The black and gray wires you're seeing are the rumble packs in the triggers. If you didn't know, the Xbox One has small vibration motors inside the triggers, which I kind of like it for games like Dead Rising, but for Call of Duty and Titanfall, fuck no. That's just stupid. Anyways, once you get that done, you will see 2 screws one on each side of the controller. I'm putting my screwdriver in there. The Torx T8 screwdriver will not work. It's too big. I forgot about that. You need a Torx T7. It does not have to be a security driver. It's a regular Torx T7 driver. Slide that bad boy in there, and the screw should come right out. The board, this back board you're unscrewing right now, it's connected to the other board by these little connector things. I don't really know how to describe it. It's kind of like the same connection that they used on the DVD player of the Xbox 360. It's weird, but you have to really, after you undo these 2 screws, I mean, you got to pull pretty hard to get this board off, but you don't want to break it. Like the first time I did this, I was scared I was going to break it, but I mean, you got to put some force to it, and you pop right out. And as you can see, those little brown things right there, they plug into the other board, and I don't even understand the logic behind this. Why couldn't they just make it one board? I don't know. But anyways, as I was just pointing there, you will use that later for your B button. But now you have a bunch more screws to remove. I think there are 6 of them. Let me see here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 6 if I'm counting right. So you remove all 6 of those, and that board just slides right out, and it will expose the buttons, and it'll expose the carbon buttons and the physical buttons. So you can actually start the mod at that point, but you need to obviously get this board out first. So remove your screws, and you should be good to go. Like I said, it's always good to have a jar or something you can keep your screws in, because you really don't want to lose these. If you lose these, you are shit out of luck, because the controller is not going to hold together very well without these screws. As you're pressing down on it and things, the board will flex, and it's not going to end well. You want to keep your screws. That is something that I've messed up in a lot of projects in my past. I've not kept my screws, and I've really needed them, so now I have just dozens of them. But it's something that you definitely want to invest in, is like a little jar, like hell, cut a bottle in half or something and use the bottom of the bottle for your screws. But anyways, once you get this thing out, this board is also, or once you get this last screw out, this board is also kind of hard to get out. You have to kind of pull on it at an angle and slide it out. It's really hard to get back in. I hate putting this board back in. But as you can see, I'm being gentle with it, sliding it out. Once it slides out, you're good to go. You just put that aside real quick, and I think we're going to take apart the triggers next after we remove the actual physical buttons. I expected them to go in my hand, but they didn't. They just kind of went all over the place, but at least they weren't on the floor. So you also want to put these buttons in a jar or something. You do not want to lose them. I think I put them in like that little hand grip thing we took off earlier. Yeah. But those, if you lose your buttons, you're also going to be shit out of luck. That'll be very uncomfortable. The Xbox button might get stuck because of the way the IR thingy-majigger up there is. It might get hung on that. But the triggers have 2 small screws on both sides. You're going to have to remove the motors so that you can do the trigger stops. And it's also significantly easier to put the controller back together when you have the tops of the triggers removed. Personally, I don't like these new triggers for what we're doing with them. I like the way they feel and all, but they're just not as durable. Like, I have 2 Xbox One controllers now, and I've broken one of the triggers because I threw my controller. I'm kind of, you know, I have rage problems when it comes to playing Call of Duty, and I got really mad and tossed my controller across the room and broke a trigger. I've beaten the shit out of my 360 controller and never broken it that bad. I've broken a couple of thumbsticks, but I've never broken a trigger or anything. So far the 360 controller is much more durable. But anyways, once you have those 2 screws removed, just pop the rumble motor out. You have to go to the front side and peel the tape back and pull the wire through it's like right under the shoulder button. Just pull it through there. Set it aside. You can always reuse it if you want that back in your controller. Do the same to the other side. If you're not going to use your rumble motors, the wire that comes off the trigger motors is really, really helpful for your actual paddles and buttons. You can use that wire because you want a small gauge wire, and that wire is perfect size. I used it on my first Scuf that I made when I was learning how to do this. So if you're having trouble finding wire, you might want to consider not putting your rumble motors back in and just using the wire from those. I'm not talking about the red and black wire, I'm talking about the gray and black wire from the trigger motors. So, just so you know. These screws and the triggers are a pain in the ass. They're not too bad taking them out, but putting them back in, I hate them. Like, you'll see me struggle pretty hard later on when I'm putting the screws back in. They keep falling out, and they're at an awkward angle, so it's like it's really, really hard to get them back in without a magnetic screwdriver. And my screwdriver is kind of magnetic, so it just kept fucking pulling them out instead of holding them in, and it was really stupid. And I was getting kind of mad at it, but you know, a magnetic screwdriver is definitely going to help you here. But anyways, this section's almost over. Let's go ahead and skip to the next one. Alright, so here's the really important part of the video. This shows you where to solder the wire for the A button. Now you're going to need an X-Acto knife or a razor blade, and you're going to go to the A button, where my thumb is, and there's a little circle at the bottom, about where the knife is right there. Scratch the carbon, the black stuff, off that little circle at the bottom of the A button. You'll see me do a close-up in a minute. And once you have that scratched off, you want to get your wire, and get a little bit of solder on the end of your wire, which you'll see me doing right here. And then you want to solder the wire to the shiny part of the bottom of the A button. You want the wire to go off the edge of the board. You don't want it to go towards the thumbstick. You want it to go towards the side of the board, like you see mine is. And you just want to dab a little bit of solder on there. You just want to get it kind of soldered. You can see kind of where mine is. I'll post a freeze frame of this in just a second, so if you're confused, you can look at that and it'll help you out. But that little bitty dot at the bottom, just scratch off a little bit of it so you see the shininess, solder to it, and then once you have it soldered, throw in some hot glue like I just did to the edge of the wire. Is probably not going to hurt anything. So right there, right where my wire is, you can see that's where you got to solder to, and then you just put the wire in the back. Throwing some hot glue in the back might not hurt either. Anyways, on to the next step. Alright, here are your trigger stop, or your triggers from earlier. We're going to go ahead and make the trigger stops for them. Your triggers should be wrapped in masking tape. I know mine weren't taking apart the controller. That's because I was using a different set of triggers. I already had them pre-taped and everything, and I wanted to change the triggers on my controller anyways. Don't ask, but anyways, you should have that little dot for where your controller sweet spot is. Just drill right on top of that dot, straight through the tape. That'll help you keep from scratching up your controller, and everything will be awesome. Should turn out looking just like that. Do that for the other one, and you'll be good to go. We'll put the screws in later on when the controller's all back together. Alright, so now that you've soldered to the A board, you now have to put the whole controller back together. So put your physical buttons back into their little slots. They can only go in one way. Buttons can't go in the wrong hole. So once you get the buttons and the carbon pad back on, take your A board, or your front motherboard thingy, and slide it into the controller shell like so. It's going to be really hard to get this thing in there. You want to slide it in for the USB port at the top is at an angle, and you want to push really hard. You know, push down really hard, and it'll snap in place. It'll take you a few tries, and you're probably going to get frustrated, but just keep pushing at it, and see how I'm kind of pushing around with my thumbs, working it in there? Do that. and eventually it'll snap in place. Once you get it snapped in place, put the screws in. I would usually put the left 3 screws in first, then you flip the controller over and make sure all your buttons are in their proper order and their proper spot, because if not, you are going to run into some trouble later on, and you're going to take the whole thing apart and redo it. So, you know, don't be sure you check your buttons before you proceed. That's what I'm saying. But anyways, put the screws back in, as you're seeing me struggle to do, because I hate these little bitty screws. A magnetic screwdriver would make my fucking world. I need to go out and buy one. But this is some of the easier stuff. It's just the kind of weird design that Microsoft used, like they used for this controller. I don't understand the point of having multiple boards. Look at my screwdriver kind of be magnetic right there. It just kind of pulls the screw out. But as long as you're using a small gauge wire, it shouldn't matter that your wire's hanging out to the side like mine is. You want to leave a bunch of length like I did, because that way you can get a perfect measurement of how much you need for your buttons. You can see me testing my buttons, making sure they're all in place. Always check your D-pad too, because the first time I did this, my D-pad was jammed. Had to take the whole fucking thing back apart and fix the D-pad, and that sucked. That really, really sucked. But once you get the screws back in, double check your buttons again, make sure everything's in place, and then you want to move on to putting your triggers back together. You'll see me do that in a second. It's a pain in the ass to put triggers back together. It's a pain in the ass, but yeah, it's all right. But the main thing I can say is make sure your wire is kind of out of the way. You might want to run it down there through the little housing where the vibration motors go. But anyways, I'm going to speed this up, and I will be back on the next step. Here you can see me start to struggle with the triggers. I'm going to make this part go by really fast because it's just fucking embarrassing. These screws made my head want to explode because I could not get them to go in to the fucking triggers. It is so... it's so goddamn frustrating. It is so goddamn frustrating. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and speed back up the video. Just wanted to go ahead and say that I get that I failed miserably with the screws. Don't laugh at me. But if you want to put your vibration motors back in, you need to do that now before you start putting back together your triggers, obviously. Alright, next up is the B board. It is the second little circuit board. It's where the thumbsticks and the B button is. Now, the B button is on its side compared to the A button, and you want to scrape off the carbon from the left point of the B button. A little bit of circle to the left. Scrape off a little bit of the carbon till you get some copper exposed, and solder directly to it. I also run my wire through the top of that shield thingy. I really don't know what that does, to be completely honest with you. But you just slide the wire through there, and it'll help keep the wire in place later on when you're putting back together the controller. That's the way I do that. But here I am struggling to keep the wire in one place while I try to solder it. It's a pain in the ass. I think I finally get it in spot, solder it, and I don't do a good enough job, and the solder breaks. I have to fucking redo it. But when you get it like that, you might want to put a dab of hot glue on the top of the board, so there's less movement in the wire. It'll probably help you out. I don't know why I didn't do that, but once you get it soldered, make sure your solder holds. Kind of give a little bit of tug on the wire to make sure your solder is going to hold, because if your solder is not going to hold from a little bit of tug on the wire, it's not going to take the pressure of the controller. So make sure you do this right, like I didn't right there. My pulling on the wire broke the solder bond. So I get it back in place, grab the soldering iron, and this time I get it. Once you get the wire soldered in place right, you need to grab your hot glue gun, and you want to put a little bit of hot glue to the left of the solder point, just to help keep the wire in place and to help, support it. So as it's getting moved around and stuff, it won't break. Alright, now we have to put the B board back on top of the A board. If you remember me saying earlier, the B board has these little connector thingies. You need to make sure they are snapped in place. When you get them snapped in place, you will get a nice firm click. So push down around the mic port, right on top of that thumbstick, and then right on top of that processor right there. I think that's the wireless receiver / sending unit. So press down on that really good and you'll get a nice click. Then screw in your 2 screws. Now is also a really good time, once you get the 2 screws screwed in, to check your B button. Make sure your B button is pressable, because if it's not, you gotta take the controller back apart and figure out why. So you want to do that now instead of later. So once you get these things screwed back in place, double check to make sure your B button's good to go, so you don't have any headaches down the road. Also, make sure your wires are nice and out of the way. I didn't do that in this one, but you might want to run them down there through the motor compartment, or the rumble motor compartment. Like I said earlier, it'll definitely help keep them out of the way when you're putting the controller back together. But I didn't do that. I wish I would have saved me a headache. So there's that. But you might also want to add some hot glue to the wire. It might help you out. Whenever you're done, grab your controller back plate like you see me having here, and see these little things I'm pointing at. You're going to drill through them. I'm pretty sure I'm using a 5/8 drill bit right here. I'm not positive though. Check the description. I'll have it updated, and the description will have the correct drill bit. Check the description for the parts always. But anyways, go ahead and drill through those. Just drill a hole through them really quickly, and that should be perfect size for your buttons. The buttons I use can be ordered from Radio Shack, bought locally, or off Amazon. I will link all 3 of them in the description. So once you have that ready, we can move on to the next step. Alright, now that you have your holes made, grab your buttons, fit them inside of the hole, and then you're going to take some hot glue to help secure the button in place, and then I'll show you where to solder it. Put your thumb on it, make sure it's nice and tight. Like I'm double checking to make sure my grip on the button's nice and tight, and you got to hold it there while the hot glue dries a little bit, because you don't want the hot glue to slide in the crack of the button, because if it does, your button is probably not going to work, and that would suck because the hot glue will bond to it. You can always peel the hot glue off. I mean, if worst comes to worst, take a lighter to it and melt it. But hold it there for a couple of seconds and it should dry. And then you want to do the same thing to the other side before you start soldering. The hot glue obviously holds the button in place so you can press it and not knock the button out. After you get it soldered, you're going to want to pretty much drown the button in it. You're going to want to surround the whole thing in hot glue once you get your solder on there. So keep that in mind. I don't think I show myself doing that, but it's always helpful. So do the same thing on this side. Put your thumb down, get a nice firm grip on it. Take your hot glue gun, glue all around the edges, and you should be good to go. And then we'll start soldering. Just make sure your button's not going anywhere first of all. I cannot stress that enough. If you don't put enough solder on it, the button's gonna pop right out, and that's just gonna suck. It's going to absolutely suck. So make sure your button's good and secure before you move on. Once you're ready to move on, get your soldering iron and some wire, and I'll show you where to solder to. But like I said, make sure you cover this thing in hot glue like I'm doing. Anyways, I'm going to move on to the next step now. Alright, so now this is where the fun begins. You want to make 2 wires about this size. They should be, these are going to be your ground wires for your buttons. These should not be very long. Again, they should be about the size that I have here. Go ahead and pre-solder both ends of the wire, and then put the wire on the point I am on the spot I'm pointing to on the board. Like right there, in between my thumbs, that little dot right there. One of those 4 prongs, that one right there. Solder straight to it. You're going to want to solder both of these wires to the same spot. I have found that works the best. So go ahead and put a little bit of solder on there, and do the same for the other thing, for the other wire. It might help you to twist the ends of the wires together before soldering, because as you'll notice, I When I solder one on, the other one falls off, and it takes me a couple of tries to get that right. So twisting the ends of the wires might help with that. But once you get it, like I think I just did, they should look something just like that, and you will have awesome results from there. Put a little bit of hot glue on there to help keep them in place. And then grab a piece of tape, masking tape, duct tape, electrical tape, any kind of tape, and tape up that whole bottom section of the controller. Like I have a piece of duct tape pre-cut, ready to go. You want it to be about the size of the bottom half of the board. See how the board has that little bottom area where the tape's covering? You want it to cover that entire area. And the reason you're doing this is because the prongs on your buttons will touch the points in the back of the board, and bad things will happen. So go ahead and get your tape perfectly lined up. You don't want it to come on the bottom edge there, because it'll interfere with putting the controller back together. So make sure your tape's not in the way. Put it on there, and you're good to go, because now no points will touch each other, and you won't have any adverse actions. Bend your wire to the place where you can solder it back together, or where you can solder it to the buttons, and we'll move on to actually soldering to the buttons now. Figure out which button you want to be what, your left being A or your right being A. Figure that out before you start soldering. I have my wires color coordinated, green for A, red for B. So, and then my white wires have a red or a green stripe. Knocked my back plate off right there. But I'm obviously putting the B on the left side like it's supposed to be. Got a little bit of solder on the end of my wire there. Soldered it to one of the buttons. If you're using the buttons I am, you solder side by side. Like it'll have 4 prongs, 2 on each side. You solder to the 2 on the same side. Doesn't matter left or right, but you solder to both your left or your right. So go ahead and do that. Do that for both sides, and you should be good to go. If you put too much hot glue on, you'll notice that you're melting your hot glue. That shouldn't matter as long as your solder bonds. It should actually help it if the hot glue melts around it. It should stay in place. I made my wire a little bit too short, and it was really difficult to get it in place. And I also forgot to strip it, and instead of wasting my time stripping it with pliers or something, I just took a lighter, melted it, pulled off the excess burn shit, and it worked really well. Lighters are very helpful for what I just did, so it's always handy to keep one near your toolbox. So you just go ahead and get your wire in the right place. If you're having trouble doing what I'm doing right here, not being able to get the wire in the right spot, having a set of helping hands, those little like alligator clamp things on a stand, they will probably come in handy right here. If not, you could always go get your roommate, your parents, your brother, your sister, somebody to help you hold the back side of the controller while you solder to the button. It'll probably help. I put a little bit extra solder here because I was just getting nothing but hot glue, and I wanted to make sure it was going to stay. So that's what that was. Once you get it all together, you're going to want to bend the wires out of the way, which I think I don't do here. You just want to make sure your wires are not going to interfere with your triggers and are not going to get in the way of the battery prongs, which you will see me showing you in a second. You want to line up your battery prongs so they're coming inside those little slots to your left. That's how you know the controller's in the right place. The controller, like the back plate of the controller, does not snap in place, really, and which is something I really don't like. But line it up, and once you get your wires out of the way and you have your 2 battery prongs, put a screw in the middle hole, screw it in a little bit just to make sure it's all the way in there, it's not going to fall out, which you'll see me do in a second. You got to push around, make sure everything's fitting in the right spot first. My wires were in the way, so I'm having to push them out of the way real quick. I think I actually broke my B button. Yeah, I did. I had to redo it. Before you might want to peek into your controller and make sure you don't break your bonds to your wire like I just did. But it's a really easy fix if you do, so don't worry about it. But make sure you have your wires out of the way and put your controller back together. Make sure your 2 battery prongs on the left side there are lining up and going into their slots. And once again, once you do that, push down on it, make sure nothing's going anywhere, move your wires out of the way so they're not hanging up any of the clips or anything. Grab one of your screws, and it's probably a good idea to give it a few rotations to get it inside the controller. It's not going to screw into anything, but at least this way it'll hold while you're pushing your faceplate on. And before I forget, put on your thumbsticks. I almost forgot there, but put on your thumbsticks before you put on your controller faceplate, because you'll be very sad if you don't. And then, like I said a second ago, screw in the screw so it comes out the other end and it's not going to fall out. And then grab your faceplate and bada bing, screw it in the rest of the way, and you're good to go. And I will see you on the next step where we make the paddles. Alright, now on to the paddles. The paddles use plastic forks. I actually use sporks from TacoBell. They use the ends of them like you're seeing right here. You line it up to the on the battery pack to your button, like I just did right there. And then you line it up like I'm doing. And then you mark it. I just put a small scratch in my scissors. You mark it where you need to chop it off at. Take some pliers or scissors and cut along that mark. I don't know if you can see the mark or not. I think you can. Cut along that mark and you're good to go. Now, from there, you just gotta put a screw, you gotta line it up and you gotta put a screw pretty much anywhere in the top half of that, or on the top region of that paddle. On my Xbox 360 Scuf controller, I used pin caps, like little pocket pocket pin caps, and they worked really well for the 360, and I like the texture of them. But I wanted a fatter paddle for the one, kind of like what Scuf uses. The ends of these sporks worked really, really well, and it keeps in the nature of the DIY to me, and I like that. So once you get your hole made, line up or just hold your controller or your paddle against the back of your controller, and kind of like just poke your drill against through the hole against your battery pack, and it should leave a small mark showing you where you need to make a hole for your screw. And once you do that, you can go ahead and start drilling. Like, see what I just did and how it made that little scratch. And you can pop your battery pack off and you can make that hole so you don't damage your controller, which you'll see me do in just 1 second. Not damage my controller, but make the hole. And then once you have the hole made, you can put in your screw and it should be good. If you want to throw in another screw like it on the left side, just repeat that step. Line it up, do your measurements, drill it in there, or drill a hole through the paddle, and then mark it on your battery pack, and then drill a hole through, put both your screws in, and you're good to go, and your paddles are made. I like these paddles because they actually feel like Scuf paddles, and that's pretty fucking awesome, I'm not gonna lie. So anyways, I'd love to hear your guys' ideas on what you use for paddles. Some people, like I said, I've used pin caps. Other people have used parts of bottles. They've cut out plexiglass. They've used Lexan. All sorts of things. Let me know what you use for the paddle. Personally, I think these plastic forks are awesome. I got both mine at TacoBell. A big shout out to the cute girl that gave me like a bag full of sporks. I think her name was Molly. So that was awesome. But anyways, you can use those and it'll be good. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and cut off the mic, and you will see me next on my test where I just play around in the menu. You can also melt the ends of the sporks to take away that rough, sharp edge and give it a nice smooth edge, and it looks better that way if you ask me. Just hold your lighter to it for a second, it'll melt down really easy, just plastic. But anyways, gonna go ahead and cut over to the test screen. And here's the test screen where you can obviously see A and B paddles are working just fine. So anyways, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to leave me a comment and ask. I will definitely help you. I try to reply to every comment that I can. If you're going to be an asshole, you're going to be blocked. But there are no stupid questions. If you're confused about something, just ask me and I will try my damnedest to help you out. My name is Ecstasy Ewok. I really hope you enjoyed the video. A like really helps me out. A subscription helps me out even more. So if you do both those things, it'd be awesome. If I help save you $100 or so, clicking that like button, you don't have to do it, but it'd make me pretty happy. Anyways, leave your questions below. Also, turning on annotations probably will help you, because as the video progresses and people ask questions, I'll put up annotations, so your question might already be answered. Go back through and check. So once again, also check the description. If you're confused about a tool or a part, check the description. All tools and parts used are in there. Anyways, my name is Ecstasy Ewok. Check out my other videos and enjoy your Scuf controller.